Welcome to Two Way Tonight. I'm Mark Halprin, reporting from New York City, where on Sunday, Donald Trump will go to Madison Square Garden. Between now and then, a lot's going to happen. Beyonce is going to appear with Kamala Harris to talk about reproductive freedom in Houston. And the world's going mad. I have to say, today has felt very different to me, and it goes back right directly to concerns I've expressed for the last few days. There's signs that things are getting very tense on both sides. It's asymmetrical, and you hear me talk about it all the time, the asymmetries. Republicans think they're going to win on social media, at Mar-a-Lago, members of Congress. That produces a different set of dynamics. I'll say again, the race is close. It shifted towards Trump, but abortion rights, women voters, superior financing and ground game, and Trump fatigue, no one should say the race is over. No one. But you can't ignore what we're seeing in the data. You can't ignore what we're seeing in the body language. And we've talked about all the various manifestations, and down ballot for Democrats is becoming an increasing issue. How Democrats want to close this contest, who are running separate from Kamala Harris, is becoming an increasing problem for Democrats. We'll talk about that. There's extraordinary rhetoric, and we're going to listen to some of it on both sides. And it's partly of the tension of what's going on, but it's partly because of the gang warfare mentality that's existed in our politics since the founding of a republic. But in the digital age, it is so escalated, okay? Democrats are saying extraordinary things. We'll listen to that. Donald Trump is on a rampage. Listen to that. The Trump campaign trotted out a Holocaust survivor to a very elderly gentleman on camera in a video. I don't know if they're doing it in paid media or not, but it's a video to say shame on Kamala Harris for invoking Germany, Nazi Germany. Kamala Harris did a gaggle today. We talked this morning on the morning meeting about how she had no public events till late in the day. She did a gaggle. We'll listen to a little bit of that. No major news there, but she handled herself fine. And as usual, I don't know that she helped herself, but didn't hurt herself. Big story that broke not that long ago. You can see it on the interweb, on all major news sources. The Chinese allegedly trying to hack the phones, and maybe successfully hacking the phones, of Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, and others. And I continue to warn, I'm not unique in saying this, the openness of American society, one of the greatest aspects of America, this election, for a variety of reasons. It started, in earnest in 2016, but the likelihood that the Chinese, the North Koreans, the Russians, and others try to mess with this election, at a minimum to divide Americans using social media and paid protesters, the chances of that, to me, are extremely high. And it's very difficult. We saw this with the President Obama administration in 2016. It's excruciatingly difficult for a Democratic administration, it'd be true if it were a Republican administration, but for this Democratic administration to make choices about what to expose publicly, to not be accused of interfering with the election. There's all sorts of stories that will come out someday about overt attempts by foreign entities to influence the election by approaching Trump and Harris adjacent people to try to get them to engage. And it involves trying to sow discord. It involves trying to hack into things. It involves double agent type behavior. And it's really worrisome. And again, whether you think whether you, as I do, whether you have doubts about the Biden administration's capacity to handle this on the political side, on just the intelligence of our intelligence side, or just the sheer complexity of it, I'm extremely worried about it. And this phone hacking story is not the last one. We'll see. Also beginning to see stories, usually this starts a little later in the process, but it's testament to World Gone Mad on Friday, the 25th, starting to see stories about ballots being stolen or ballots being destroyed or election officials committing acts of egregious impropriety before the election. This is one of my least favorite things to cover, because you see a tweet or you hear something on cable or you get a text trying to get to the facts is very difficult. And you think about the national and local, regional, state news organizations. So somebody stole a bag of ballots in Pennsylvania. How are you supposed to cover that? Your entire political reporting team is off doing stuff. So somebody has to be diverted there. And then the fog machine and the anger machine and all the negativity is going to fight the bandwidth of facts, right? The system is geared towards negative, false, inflammatory. Okay. Now, none of the things I've mentioned, as big as some might seem to you, are close to as big as the biggest political story of the day. And the reason I know it's the biggest political story of the day is I was in a diner in Green Bay. I spent the day in Green Bay going to diners, talking to undecided voters in Green Bay diners. And I flew back to New York. And all anybody was talking about in Green Bay was the Washington Post decision not to endorse in the presidential race. I kid. I don't think any voter really cares about this. But in elite political and media circles, it is all anybody's talking about. And I see that there are some underlying issues here involving freedom of the press, Trump derangement syndrome, the woke takeover of many of our major news organizations, tradition, Jeff Bezos. There are a lot of big themes here that you could argue connect to something that the public would care about or should care about. But this is a classic story that elites care about. I really don't care that much about it. Maybe I'm not an elite. Elites care about it. It's all that's in my inbox. If you look at Twitter and journalists, and this, if it weren't a Friday, my goodness, this would go on forever. Media reporters are not always great about working Saturdays and Sundays. So it'll be all over the news in elite media circles for the next couple of days and maybe beyond. But you would think that the Washington Post did something truly profound. And for the woke people in the newsroom, it is truly profound that they're not going to endorse Kamala Harris. But again, I bring this up to say the world is going mad because we're getting down to the end. Now, let's look at some stuff. After we look at some stuff, I'm going to ask you to weigh in. We've got a few great folks here with us. Jonathan Alter's here to talk about his book. And when Jonathan's here, somebody will tell me so we can get him right in. But until then, if you'd like to be in the conversation, please raise your hand. If you're watching on the two-way platform, you have the capacity to be part of the conversation. That's what this is about. We love new people. So please raise your electronic hand if you'd like to be part of the conversation. If you're watching on YouTube, peace, love, and understanding. We're trying to be the antidote to the world gone mad, and we will all the way through Election Day. Daily admonition, really twice a day. Think about how you'll behave if your side wins, and think about how you'll behave and how you'll feel if you lose. Because there's going to be a lot of really disappointed people. Okay, now let's look at some stuff. This morning on Morning Joe, John Meacham, continuing in the great tradition of Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris and some of the now never Trumpers who worked in the administration, cast the prospect of Donald Trump winning and the what it would say about anyone who would vote for Donald Trump in terms that some might call apocalyptic. Please play number one.
That's exactly it. You know, Vice President Harris isn't on trial here in the same way President Biden wasn't on trial when he was running. We are. The American people are on trial. And if we choose, if a sufficient number of us in a sufficient number of states choose to ignore the evidence that, as the Bible says, those with eyes to see and ears to hear can detect, then there's no, we have no excuse. We might have an explanation, which is that for a series of reasons, people are not holding the Republican Party and the nominee of that party to rational account. And I think that this is a test of citizenship in a way that certainly you'd have to go back, I think, to both the 19th century and the civil rights era to find anything equivalent. I think Gene's exactly right in that the conventional media conversation just isn't commensurate to, and hasn't been for a long time, to this election. This is not Bob Dole and George Mitchell duking it out with Bob Novak. You know, it's just, that's like talking about the Peloponnesian War, right? This just isn't that. And, you know, we can lament it, and we should, but what we really have to do, I think, is insist that if you believe in what you say you believe, and everybody we know, Willie, everybody we know believes that they're constitutionalists, they're Americans, they believe in the country. Well, if you believe that, if that's what you say you believe, patriotism is not nationalism, and Trump is a nationalist. It's nationalism is loyalty to your own kind, right? To people who look like you, who are exactly like you. Patriotism is allegiance to an idea. The idea that, as Thomas Jefferson articulated it, and the Constitution has tried to actuate it, and however imperfectly, we've managed to realize just a little bit more through the years. And that's been the conversation in America. And the conversation could take a radical, risky, and possibly irreversible turn if we don't pay attention.
Okay, so some of you might find that inspiring or heartbreaking or cautionary, and some of it might find it as outrageous a soliloquy as you've heard. Okay, I'm trying to see all sides here. I played that because John's a very smart guy and very passionate about what he's saying. But boy, is that kind of rhetoric going to help us here. I don't really know what his intention was. Maybe he was just speaking from the heart. But boy, is that characterization of Donald Trump and Donald Trump supporters, is that going to help us get through this? I find it to be, every time I've watched it 3 times now, and every time I watch it, I wonder, of all the things embedded in there, I wonder how impactful that kind of conversation is going to be. Because it's not, to me, a bomb. To me, it's a bomb. All right. Both Donald Trump and Kamala Harris talked to the media in Texas today. And I'm just going to show them to both so you can get a sense of the cut of their jibs today, how they're feeling as they lash out at their various targets. And I'm playing the Trump one first because, as always, there's a little bit of Don Rickles. Trump, please, number 2.
Why? Because the family came to and they said that the magazine totally lied and misrepresented. This was the same magazine that said that I said about dead soldiers that there was something, what was it, suckers and losers. Think of it. I'm supposed to be standing there over the graves of soldiers with people around me, military people or whatever, making a statement like that. Can you imagine? Can you imagine anybody doing it? I think I'd end up I may be the president, but I think somebody would start a fist fight. And probably I would say, you were right in it. Who would do this? They make up stories. It's not even like they have sources. They don't have sources. They're storytellers. They say, what would be bad? I have a bad one. And you know when it's always released? Same time with the last one. It's released just before the election. That suckers and losers story, which was totally fabricated. There's nobody that loves the military. And these were World War I heroes. They died in World War I. And I'm saying, they were suckers. I mean, you'd know me. They were suckers or losers. Can you imagine it? And the problem I have, Ted, is that 5, 10, 20% of people, when they read that, they're going to believe it. So I talk about it because it was a terrible thing. You know, I walked past, I remember we're doing a big event, and I was going back to Air Force One, and they were under the wing, these fake news people. They're so bad. There's a lot of them back there, by the way. We got a lot of them honoring that special person, right? We got a lot of fake news. But I remember I'm walking past, and I hear the people shouting and everything. And I heard this one voice, loud, boisterous, horrible voice, say, "Did you call the dead soldiers from World War I suckers and losers?" I said, I didn't, to myself, I said, man, that's a bad one. Because
So there's another Rorschach test for you, right? Some of you I saw in the chat laughed at that. There's my president, hilarious, stream of consciousness, a little bit of the weave. And others of you watched that outraged, believe he's lying, indignant at his tone, probably didn't appreciate the way I did Trump imitating Trump. I like when he does that. But that is his mood right now. He chose a representative of how he's feeling. You think that's a guy who thinks he's losing? No. And by all accounts, he thinks he's going to win. And there are people around him who's telling him he's going to win easily right now. All right. Vice President Harris, also in Texas. I'm not saying that this is a tell that trumps everything else. But one thing that happens with campaigns that feel they're behind is they see something in the news or something their opponent says, and they jump on it to make it message of the day. Bernie Sanders from the left, but some from the center, would like Kamala Harris to stop making news on anything but the economy, right? And what happens, and the classic is Dole in 96. Where is the outrage, he said. And he would get new lines based on what was in the news to try to break into the news cycle, to try to change the dynamic of the race. I don't say she's doing this as again, it's not a tell that trumps everything else. But Donald Trump said something about the U.S. being the trash can. It's all over Drudge. And the Harris campaign decided it's something she should address. So here's number 3, Vice President Harris in Texas, gaggling with her traveling press.
I also do want to address the comment that Donald Trump made about America being the trash can of the world, whatever he said, something along those lines. It's just another example of how he really belittles our country. This is someone who is a former president of the United States, who has a bully pulpit. And this is how he uses it, to tell the rest of the world that somehow the United States of America is trash. And I think, again, the President of the United States should be someone who elevates discourse and talks about the best of who we are and invests in the best of who we are. Not someone like Donald Trump who's constantly demeaning and belittling who the American people are. America deserves better.
Indeed. All right. So those 3 clips to me, unfortunately, kind of helped define the day, along with, of course, the important decision of the Washington Post not to endorse. All right. John Alter is going to join us, and we're going to talk about his book and the reporting he has on Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden, which is still of enduring interest, I know, to many. It is to me. It's a great part of American history. Alex Castellanos and Mark McKinnon are joining us. Alex, while we wait for Mark, you first. I'd love for you to react to those 3 clips and weave a tapestry. What did those 3 clips say to you? Meacham and President Trump and Vice President Harris. What did you see in those 3 faces?
Well, they say you never learn as much as when you lose in politics, and I'm a very well-educated political consultant. And what you see in campaigns that are losing near the end is they reduce themselves to their crystalline core. They trade breadth for intensity. They go after the most radical thing that appeals to their base. And I think what we're seeing in Meacham, who's a wonderful guy, and love and respect immensely, but what you're seeing out of the Harris campaign, he's Hitler. He's a bad, orange man bad. And, the apocalyptic vision for the country if he should win, that's going to motivate the base. Now, sometimes campaigns at the end, when they're shrinking and they've run out of doors to knock on that'll get them across the 50-yard line, make a conscious decision to reduce themselves to they're 46, 47, 48% and say we're going to beat them on the ground. We'll beat them with turnout. Our machine is better. And Democrats can do that. They basically turn a general into a midterm. But sometimes campaigns just run out of message. They run out of script, as they say in Hollywood, and then they turn to what they become who they are. It's not an intentional strategy. It's all they have, and I don't know which it is for Harris, but it smells like decline.
Mark McKinnon, you have fingertips every bit as exquisitely sensitive as Alex's. What do you see in those three videos?
Well, let me, if I can, just jump to location because I'm just struck, Mark, by the decision to be in Texas, and the reason I'm struck by it is because I mean the obvious issue of being in a non-swing state, but I'm reminded of when we were doing the circus 8 years ago in 2016, and it was probably the same day. It was a week out, and I went to see Hillary Clinton with Jennifer Palmieri in Arizona. And I remember thinking, why in the hell are they in Arizona and not in Wisconsin or Pennsylvania? And I think the rationales are different. I think Clinton was doing that as a sort of false confidence and trying to run up the numbers. And I'm not sure why Harris is there, uh, but it just the the campaigns that I think are successful are ones that have a strategy and stick to it. And campaigns that switch up strategies, weekly or monthly or, often are signs of campaigns of trouble. Now, I don't know that I agree, though. I mean, I still am bullish on Harris, and I think that I just don't think there's much persuasion going on right now. Listen, if I think I don't, Mark, tell me about the context of the trash can or of the world. And maybe it's not fair context, but if he
Sure.
said that, I don't know that I wouldn't go after that.
Really? Is that because it dovetails with the message of Trump doesn't care about people? Like,
No,
what's
this
the
I just I because it dovetails with the message that I have a much more positive vision of America and City on a Hill and really kind of running through the tape
okay?
with a very positive, forward-leaning message, and
Okay,
that I
but
believe in America.
two of her three messages are not positive. Two of her three closing messages about abortion rights not being discussed in a positive way, but being discussed in a way to alarm
Well,
people.
I think there
And
should be a
and
contrast. Don't get me wrong. I'm not
yeah,
saying that there shouldn't be a contrast as
I
well. And listen, I think
do.
listen. I think Mark again. It's my view, and I'm just a
yeah,
shallow media guy with an opinion. But I think there's very little persuasion going on at this point. I don't think it makes that much difference. I think it's going to be who gets out their base and who's more enthusiastic. And my sense is that women are going to be the margin that
yeah,
they're more enthusiastic about this race, and it's
yeah.
just as simple as that.
We had
I
eight
do,
undecided
Mark.
Pennsylvanians on yesterday, so there's got to be persuasion for at least those eight. Alex.
I do want to. I do agree 100% with Dr. McKinnon that campaigns that have 10 strategies have no strategies. You know, Napoleon, he who defends everything defends nothing. And the Trump campaign is not that campaign. The Harris campaign is wandering. I do think, though, that campaigns are different now. And I know we've talked about this before, but if you wanted to campaign in Pennsylvania 20 years ago, you'd go to Pennsylvania. If you want to campaign in 8 battleground states now, you can go to Austin.
Yeah,
And you
yeah,
campaign everywhere because campaigns don't happen in states, they happen on our screens. And
yeah,
you could be down the block in Pennsylvania and not create a big enough event to
yeah. That's
actually
true.
campaign in Pennsylvania. So
Good point.
I don't fault Harris for going to Beyonce in Texas. Now, why she's doing it on a Friday night,
At
okay,
9:30, at 9:30.
at 9:30, but Beyonce can, wash my clothes at the cleaners with a cowboy hat any day. I think it's, not a bad thing. But campaigns do seem to reduce themselves to this crystalline core at the very end when they've given up persuading beyond it. And Trump has never had tried to appeal much beyond that base. That's not who he is and what his campaign is. But Harris was. Harris was trying to do that. And I don't think it happened.
Yeah. Victor, welcome in. Tell folks where you are, who you're supporting, and what's on your mind.
Hi, I'm actually in the Bahamas, but I vote in Florida. I'll speed run through your usual questions. I found
Where in
about
the
two.
Bahamas?
Marsh Harbor in Abaco.
Oh,
We
Treasure
got
City,
thoroughly
love it.
destroyed by the most catastrophic hurricane in Atlantic history 5 years ago, but we've come back pretty strong.
Great.
I found out about you because I follow Mark on X. I've been watching this from the start. It's an absolutely fantastic resource. I love the balance. My vote support history would have been McCain, Johnson, Trump, and I'm supporting Trump this time, mainly for Israel and for the. I'm extremely uncomfortable with the way the transgender issue has been handled in culture. It's like about 10 years ago, I started seeing this phrase, fact, trans women are women. And I was like, well, wait a minute, when did we decide that? And it's like the elites made this decision that this was the case. And I was like, well, I think that people who are adults should be able to do whatever they want. But I don't think that we necessarily have to agree. I can respect somebody. I certainly have every respect in the world for Caitlyn Jenner. I'm not going to call him Bruce or anything like that, but I don't think that makes him, sorry, I did not mean to do that. That makes her a woman. I think you can have respect for people and not have to upend the whole of society for a very small um, for a very small segment. I think it's inappropriate to refer to women as bodies with vaginas, as they did on the cover of the Lancet a couple of years ago. I think it's inappropriate to have biological men in women's prisons. I think it's inappropriate to have biological men competing against women in sports. I don't think that's appropriate or fair. And Kamala, sorry, clearly has no intent. Clearly, it's not going to do anything about that. But I believe
Victor,
Donald Trump will.
all
And
right, Victor,
also, as I say,
yep.
Israel is very important to me. So that's the other thing.
Okay, appreciate that. Do you have a question you want to ask, or you just want to share all that?
Um, well, what I was going to ask, totally unrelated either of those things, if a lot of people are saying that the 7 states might go one way or the other, that if it swings, like if a bunch of women show up motivated by abortion, they could all go to the vice president, or that they could all go to Trump. If that happens, what do you think would be the next state to fall on either side? If they all fall to Trump and he gets an 8th state, what do you think it would be? Or if they all fall to Harris and she picks up another one, which do you think that might be?
Alex, go ahead. Thank you, Victor. Go ahead, Alex.
I don't think all 7 have to fall in one direction or the other for there to be a surprise. As a matter of fact, it's like the delta in the stock market. Something weird is going to happen this election because there's just so much pressure in the pressure cooker. I would not be surprised if a state like New Hampshire, out of the blue, went Trump, or Virginia. I think probably Trump will lose Virginia, but I think it'll be closer than people think. And it might tip. I don't know about New Mexico, but I'm looking for these states here. There's a wave out there. My concern is that Trump has a ceiling. Let's see, 2016 and 2020, Trump got 48% in Pennsylvania. He won one, lost the other. He got 47% in Michigan 2016 and 2020. Won one, lost the other. My concern is he has a ceiling, but with Kamala's kind of decline a little bit here, I think that's moving up, and I think it's putting other things in play. So I think we may get some surprises even if these battleground states split.
Mark, want to wager on that?
Listen, I I agree with Alex. Listen, I think that the dynamics of this election are such that I think there's going to be a lot of stories after this election that we hadn't anticipated. And I think there's going to be a lot of surprises. I also believe that it's highly likely, as the questioner just said, that it could be a 7-state sweep either way. That would not surprise me. So I think any outcome, and as to what that additional state might be, I don't know. I'll leave that to Karl Rove and Alex.
Yeah. I'd say New Hampshire or New Mexico for Trump, and I don't see a state for the vice president right now. It'd be just a shock if any of the red states moved. I guess if I had to pick something, I'd pick Maine too. Victor, thank you for joining. Appreciate it. Carol, welcome in. Thank you for joining. Tell folks who don't know where you are, who you're supporting, what's on your mind.
Hey, yeah. Hey, how you doing? Hi, guys. I'm from a suburb of Boston, and I am supporting Jill Stein. I might go with Kamala. I'm not sure. Probably going to be Stein. I just have a question about, I've been watching this for a long time, and there does seem to, I know the gender gap is real. I know a lot of women are going for, Kamala. But I also feel like there might be a hidden female Trump vote they're not capturing, because I've heard a lot of women on here, older women, like sort of in my, late 50s. I'm all for women's rights. Believe me, I marched on Washington back in the day. But there always seems to be these discussions around abortion, like not like, oh, I was drunk and got pregnant in college and wanted to go down to Planned Parenthood for $200 and get an abortion. It's always these catastrophic, I wanted this baby so bad, and it had all these, deformities, and I was bleeding out in the parking lot of the hospital. I don't think that's really flying with a lot of older women. Certainly we want rights for our daughters, but I just feel like the scare tactic around this is almost kind of backfiring a little bit. It just seems a little
Okay.
bit too
Okay.
much.
Carol, thank you. Alex,
Yeah.
thank you, Carol. Carol, go
I
ahead.
think one way to think about this, I think that's a good point, Carol. And one way to think about this, we talk about the shy Trump voter, and our initial reaction is, well, there's a guy in the suburbs who can't tell his wife who's pro-choice, and who can't put a Trump sign in his lawn because his neighbors would rip it apart. There's another shy Trump voter, and it's the rural outsider, working class, blue collar person who gets a call on a survey saying who you're going to vote for. And this guy feels like he's been disrespected and not paid attention to, and the people he sent to Washington to represent him have betrayed him. And when he gets that phone call for the survey or gets that text, he's saying, you're part of the problem. You're part of the media. You're part of the establishment. I'm not going to play your game. And I think we're adding to that possibly a lot of moms in the suburbs who were pro-choice last election and still are, but now they're raising kids and sending them to school every day. And they are worried about their daughter being in a bathroom and being unsafe. And I think that mom can't necessarily, she can't put a Trump sign in her yard either. But I do think that may be out there. I do.
I
I
have a
think that,
I have a I have a
and I
different
don't know
opinion
how
on
you
this,
measure
Mark.
it.
Yeah. All right, Alex, thank you. Go ahead, Mark. Alex, go ahead. I mean, Mark.
I think just the opposite is true. I think that there may be suburban Republican women who are just like Trump voters at 16 who are afraid to say that they're not for Trump. I mean, I think they're living in Republican communities and Republican husbands that are voting for Trump, and I think they care deeply about reproductive rights. Obviously, there's a hardcore uh, 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 pro-life contingency in the Republican Party, but there are Nikki Haley voters, suburban women out there who are pro-choice, who I think are moved by this issue, and I think that they're quiet about it. So I think the
Why are
shy
they
voters
quiet, Mark? Why are they
because they don't
quiet?
want to
Because
be screamed at by their husbands.
Being a Nikki Haley voter is like the coolest thing you could be.
Huh. All right. Stand by. Carol,
Well,
thank you.
Yeah, that may be
Uh,
true, Alex, but it's not cool in their communities where their husbands all voting for Trump to say that they're going to vote for Harris.
I
all right,
wish I
well,
were.
Sam,
I wish I were that influential a husband.
Sam,
Well, you're
welcome in.
not.
Hi.
Sam, welcome in. Thank you for joining. Tell folks who don't know where you
Hey,
are,
can you hear me?
who you're supporting. We hear you great. Tell us
Okay, great.
where you are, who you're supporting. Where are
I
you?
voted for Trump in 2020, didn't vote for the top of the ticket in 2016. I'm voting for Trump hesitantly, but I'll tell you, when it was Biden, I was seriously thinking about Biden only because my frustration with Trump is what he did to the party, in that, like, I I know you probably all remember this, when he gave the Senate basically to the Democratic Party back in 2020, when he said that, don't go vote. And so the two Senate candidates ended up becoming Democrat. And after that, back in January of 2020, and then slowly after that, he completely destroyed the governor. I don't know if you guys remember the governor of our state,
Yeah.
Arizona. Excellent governor, conservative guy. And, you talk a lot about like Texas and Abbott and some of the things they did during COVID. Well, our governor was even way better. I mean, in terms of opening up the schools, and he was the first governor to give $7,500 per family because of COVID to go to schools that were open. He opened, I mean, he just did a ton of stuff, but because Trump criticized him, we now have the likes of Carrie Lake running for Senate. He would have been the next. So anyway, I was really frustrated at that point because not only did he give the Senate to the Democrats, I feel, and most people concede that, he also, I don't know if you know much about Arizona politics, but they're a mess, and a big part of that,
Yeah.
I think, has to do with Trump's influence. So
Sam, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'd love if you had a question if you'd ask.
yeah, so my question is, I'm just wondering if you run into other people like me that Biden, that would have gone with Biden.
Yeah.
That if they hadn't, but when Kamala took over, it was just so extreme, her views.
Yeah.
And I don't believe she's changing back. I mean, there's no way. She hasn't articulated a reason. She was very articulate in her description of why she was so extreme. She was very clear in describing when she was extreme and why she felt that way. And so I think we all know she's exactly who she was. She just can't say it because she would have some sort of sister soldier moment, like you guys say, or some sort of explanation. So she's really, really, like they say, the most liberal senator of the whole Senate, when she was in the Senate. So when she was the one that was put up, that made me go back to Trump. And I'm just curious if you guys.
Yeah, there are people like you. They're not all for the same reasons, but there's certainly some trades. Vice President Harris brought strengths that Biden had. She shares some of his strengths and weaknesses, and she clearly's got some weaknesses he doesn't.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining. Appreciate the perspective. Ellen, come on in. Tell folks who don't know where you are, who you're supporting, what's on your mind, please.
Anna, I did your focus group. What was that, like a month ago?
Yeah.
Yes. And so I do have a question.
I'm sorry. First, tell folks who don't know where you are and who you're supporting.
Oh, I'm in Arizona and I'm still undecided. After the focus group, I did start leaning Harris, but I still haven't decided yet.
Yeah. What about in the Senate race? Who are you voting for?
Not Carrie Lake. She's crazy.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. Do you have a question or something you want to say? Otherwise, I'm going to let Alex and Mark ask you questions. But
no, I do have a question. This might be kind of a dumb, naive question, but I work with 4- and 5-year-olds. And so in that world, behavior is a form of communication. Today on the morning meeting.
Are they Senate candidates or governor's candidates? Just kidding.
Oh, that's funny. But in the morning meeting, you guys talked a lot about Harris's very light campaign schedule. And so in that world of behavior as a form of communication, what do you think she is trying to communicate to us by having this very light campaign schedule? And I'm sure her staff is telling her, you need to give more detailed answers. And then she's not. So what is she communicating to us? I'm not all in.
Yeah, I think she spent. I know. What your thesis is often correct. I think in this case, she's simply having meetings, preparing for her appearances, and uh, subscribing to the view that if you do one good event a day, that gets everywhere, and you don't
Is
need
that
to do
typical?
2 events. There are many people in politics who subscribe to that theory.
Okay.
Alex or Mark, what do you think?
Mark,
Hold on, Mark's muted.
Mark's
Yes.
on mute.
Hey, go
Yeah,
ahead, Mark.
I agree with Mark. I mean, I don't know exactly what her schedule is, but I assure you that she's, it's packed around the clock when they're making very strategic decisions. I mean, the most important thing any candidate has is time. And, you're gonna get, if you're lucky, you get one story a news cycle. And, by doing 5 events doesn't mean you're gonna get 5 different stories. In fact, you don't want 5 different stories. You want one story. So,
Oh, that's true.
so you want to strategically focus on, one event, one big story, and then use your time strategically to raise money or whatever the hell you need to do on the campaign.
Yeah, Ellen, I'm going to give you. Go
My
ahead, Al.
friend Brad Todd wrote a piece the other day about a different theory, and that is what Kamala Harris doesn't do tells you what she can't do. Her town hall was not a tremendous success last night. She requires a lot of preparation. I mean, she was stellar, I think, in that first debate. A
Yeah.
lot of prep. She did a great job. She's not repeated that. She is not somebody who can maintain a level of excellence without tremendous preparation. And I think her campaign knows that. So I think, yes, they figure we'll do one good thing a day. But we're not going to, which is strange because in today's world, I mean, the only limited resource you have in a campaign, you can raise more money, you can't raise more time.
Yeah.
And whether you're attacking Trump or selling Kamala Harris, you would think they would use her more. But I think what she doesn't do tells you what her campaign believes she can't. And she is very, you can argue that the best way for her to win the tail end of an election is an interesting thing. It's about spotlight control.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've got two fairly unpopular candidates, and
Mm-hmm.
whoever the spotlight is on, if the election is about them, they're probably losing. So you want the election to be on the other guy, on
Right.
the other woman. And right now, I think the Harris campaign has decided our candidate doesn't have enough cred and ability to let the spotlight shine on her. It'll be too hot and burn her out. We want the spotlight on our opponent. It's not a bad strategy at all.
Ellen, I want to ask you 2 questions, Ellen, and then I want to
Sure.
bring John Alter in. I'm going to just ask you to finish each sentence with just a short phrase, okay? If you end up voting for Kamala Harris, it will be because.
She is who I wanted to answer the phone at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Okay, and if you vote for Donald Trump, it will be because.
I'm a never Trumper. So if I was forced,
Are you choosing between Trump and Harris, or Harris and
no,
something
I
else?
was choosing between writing and Nikki Haley and Harris.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
So
got
if
it.
you
Ellen,
if you vote
Can't
for
move
Donald
past-
Trump,
it'll
so
be
if you
because you
vote
made
for
a
Donald
mistake.
Trump, the answer would be I've had too much to drink.
Yeah, or butterfly ballot.
Too much wine.
Ellen, thank you for joining. John Alter, thank you for joining. John's going to join us tonight and next week because I want to spend a fair amount of time talking with him about his book. And there are usually 2 kinds of political books that are well reported or well written. It's rare to be both. John Alter only writes books that are both. John, tell people what your book is about, what it's called, and then I want to ask you about the race, and then I want to have you come back next week and talk at length about the book.
The book is called American Reckoning: Inside Trump's Trial and My Own. I was one of the only people, just about a dozen of us, who were in the courtroom of the felony trial every single day in New York. And remember, it was untelevised. So when people like me were sending dispatches, I was writing for the New York Times opinion section, and then for the Washington Monthly, which credentialed me, and Old Goats, my Substack. These were like messages in a bottle. They did not begin
to reflect the drama of what went on in the trial of the century so far, and so there was just a lot happening in this trial that most people didn't get unless they read the trial transcripts or something. And even then, you would not get the full flavor of what was going on. So I wanted to do that, but I also wanted to, in just a very short book that I wrote over the summer, to explain the stakes. I don't think the stakes are being well enough appreciated. And I think when General Milley and John Kelly say the man is a fascist, we should listen to that. And so what I do in the book is I provide a lot of evidence to suggest that they are correct. I actually have some of John Kelly's earlier comments in the book. And so I think it's really important that for all this outstanding horse race coverage that you're doing, Mark, on a daily basis, that we match that with what you might call stakes coverage, where we really look hard at what is on offer for the American people. And I do think our ideals are really being tested, and that this is not a drill, and that this guy is not just another candidate, not just another Republican candidate for president. I mean, I think Liz Cheney's right that he's not a conservative in any sense of the word, but he's also not even just, he's so out of our system. When you see this thing with Musk and Putin, basically Trump wants to be an American Putin. Putin is the only person he's never said anything critical about in the entire world. And Harris is entirely right that he can be easily manipulated by Putin. So I just think that, whether the voters are caring about this or not, we need to do everything we can in the closing days to make them care. And they did care about democracy in the closing days of the 2022 race. And January 6th, exit polls showed it was a big issue in preventing a red wave. I think it can be again, if that spotlight that Alex was talking about is properly focused on the right thing, which is that Donald Trump is dangerous for this country. And we just simply, no matter whether we agree with Harris or totally disagree with her on policy, as Pat Moynihan used to say, taxes go up, taxes go down. Those aren't the real issues for this country. I'm not talking about the real issues for voters and their concerns. I'm talking about what, as a historian, or I think any smart political analyst, or all of the many, many smart people you have on this call, they all understand at some level that this guy is dangerous. So the question is, what will people do about it?
Yeah. John, if Trump wins, and if let's say he wins sizably, which I don't think is impossible,
no,
how will you explain that to yourself?
Well, I mean, first in the book, I confess, I have always for many years liked to think of myself as an idealist without illusions. That's the way John F. Kennedy described himself. And I now realize I have more illusions about a big chunk of the American electorate than I thought I did. I mean, I had read, Sinclair Lewis, It Can Happen Here, that he wrote in the 1930s. William Shirer wrote that Americans were susceptible to dictatorship. I had always thought it, with Huey Long and Joe McCarthy, George Wallace, the demagogues never really got that close to the White House. Wallace ran 3 times and didn't make it. He was shot in 72. But, it didn't seem like something that was going to get to the presidential level. And so demagoguery works. And that's my first D in, trying to.
So what would you say if Trump won big?
The demagoguery works.
No, but what would you say
works.
Okay, but what would you say if somebody saw you on the street the day after the election and they said, Jonathan, I saw you on two-way and I heard you say the reason Trump won is because demagoguery works. I don't feel I voted for him because of demagoguery. I feel I voted for him because I wanted the border controlled and I didn't want my daughter playing against the trans.
Well, I would, because I'm honest with people, I would say, well, I wish, it's too late now, but I wish you had looked at some issues beyond the particular campaign issues this year to the character of the man and to the sense of whether he had the decency, the moral standing that we should expect from our president, and whether you maybe didn't look hard enough about whether he's selling out our allies. I mean, you know, we've kept the nation safe from a world war for, you know, 80 years because of the notion of collective security, which is better known now as NATO, right? Collective security works. Trump, Vance, Putin, they're on the wrong side of this. And so I would say to that person, I would say to that voter, look, I have respect for you. I'm sure you're a very decent person. I don't think you're deplorable, but you made a serious misjudgment when you went into the polling place. I'm sorry.
So the Harris campaign is suggesting that she's got 3 closing topics: abortion rights, reproductive freedom, the economy broadly defined, including Social Security and taxes and everything else, and then this issue of Trump being unfit. Would you think it would be smarter for her to simply focus on the last one, or you think all 3 are important?
No, I think she has to focus on all of these issues. I think her line from the town hall, she didn't, you know, perform especially well. I thought Van Jones had the best approach, which is that Trump is lawless, Harris has to be flawless. So there is a double standard, but she did get off one important line, which you may have, I know you've heard about, that Axelrod highlighted, you know, that Trump has an enemies list and I have a to-do list. And I think what that encapsulates is that Trump really is dangerous. And I actually want to get stuff done. And Trump hasn't done anything on small business, for instance. You know, his proposals are really thin when you look at them. Some of them, as Goldman Sachs and Moody's found would destroy the budget and probably tip us into a recession. If you look at 20% tariff, it's insane. I think Mark Cuban called it inflationary lunacy. But otherwise, he doesn't have much that he's offering. So it's important that she keep focused on the future. What am I going to do for you down the road? But also have this theme of not fascism, because people, it's been too long since they studied fascism in school, but you know, ways of explaining why he is going to betray our allies, use his powers against the American people, and is indecent. So I keep coming back to the story of Paul Pelosi, and I don't understand why there hasn't been more attention on Paul Pelosi. Why do I mention Paul Pelosi? Because last week, Trump said that he would use the military and the National Guard against the enemy within. And he mentioned just 3 people, Adam Schiff and the Pelosi's. That really caught my attention, not just Nancy Pelosi, the Pelosi's. All right, so who is Paul Pelosi? He's an 82-year-old man who had his skull fractured by a Trump cultist who broke into his house. When he was near death in the hospital, Trump is making jokes about him. Later, the next year, he's speaking to the California Republican Party state convention. He's still making jokes about him a year later. And now he's so mad at Pelosi for, you know, maneuvering Biden out of the race, which I have all this fresh reporting on in my book. He's so mad about that now he's still after Paul Pelosi. He wants to use the National Guard against Paul Pelosi. You could say, well, he'll never be able to do that. But just the fact that that's what he wants to do, that's the kind of individual we're talking about, as Joe Biden rightly said, the lack of decency, the cruelty, he's a sick fuck. That's what Biden said. And he's totally right. So people have to ask themselves, do they want a sick fuck as their president who wants to use the National Guard against an 82-year-old man who was almost killed, who happens to be married to Nancy Pelosi? And that's what we need to focus on.
Okay, John, I'm hoping you have time for us
I'm
next
sorry
week
to
to
be
come
so
back.
passionate about
No, that's
this,
all right. That's
but
right. I'm hoping you have time next week. Good, safe on your travels, and we'll talk about when you can come back. Okay.
Yeah, we'll talk about
Thank you.
my
We'll talk
Pelosi
about the
scoops.
book. Yeah,
Great,
want
thank
to do
you.
that, John. Thank you. All right. So if I were the kind of person who didn't extend the presumption of grace, I'd be effing outraged at what I saw in reaction to John Alter. The whole point of this platform, John Alter speaks articulately, passionately for tens of millions of people about how they feel if Donald Trump will be elected. You Trump supporters who are in the chat, okay? This is exactly what we're trying to do here. Appreciate. You disagree with John. You're more concerned with 51 intelligence officers. You're more concerned with the border. You're more concerned with the price of buying a new home. I respect all that too. But what I don't respect, honestly, is looking at what John says with passion and conviction and a belief that he represents the greatest of American traditions and nitpicking what he said or mocking him or rejecting his presence on the platform. Please understand, if Donald Trump wins, whether it's big win or small win, tens of millions of people are not only going to feel like Jonathan feels, but it's going to crush a lot of them. It's going to make a lot of them feel alienated from America. John can articulate why he thinks Trump won. Saying to people Trump won because he was a demagogue isn't going to sit well with a lot of people. Sure, it didn't just now. But don't act like John has got a fringe opinion. Jonathan's opinion and passion, tens of millions. Please, if you're here on the platform, try to be in the spirit of what we're trying to do here. Learn from what Jonathan says, even if you disagree with it. And don't act like you're at some stoning where you can't do anything but mock or disagree or engage in personal attacks. The reason we care about this platform is there's very few places where Jonathan can say what he said with Trump people listening. And the whole point is to not mock, but to learn. I'm so unsettled about everything that happened today. Didn't ask John about the important development at the Washington Post. And I joke around a lot, and I'll be light as I can be. But I'm telling you, when you listen to Jonathan Alter and you disagree, do it respectfully and not personally. And please be ready to win and ready to lose next Tuesday or whenever we know the result. But to be so insulting to someone speaking passionately, and not in a kooky way, but in a way that reflects lots of Americans who will vote next week or have already voted, to do that is not only not in the spirit of this platform, but is helping to contribute to what we all should want to head off, which is that America can't handle an election. Okay? Thanks to Mark McKinnon and to Alex. Stand by this weekend. I'm going to go out. I didn't go to Green Bay in case you didn't know, but I am going to travel this weekend to some political events. And so be ready, watch my X feed, watch my Substack, may have some pop-up events over the weekend. We'll see. Certainly 9 o'clock on Monday morning, Sean Dan and I will be back. I don't remember who Tim is. Sean Dan and I will be back for a regular episode, and we'll see you all week. And mark your calendar. We haven't announced it yet, and we're not ready to announce it in full, but we will be with you on election night. And we're going to bring you the kind of coverage that you're used to, bipartisan and aggregation, right? We'll be watching everything and talking to everybody. So you don't need to flip around. We'll flip around for you. And we'll be with you for at least some of the night. So make sure you've got a second screen charged unless you want us to be your first screen. But I think you're going to enjoy what we do on election night. Two-way conversation. I'll say with respect to my friends and colleagues at the networks, maybe a little bit more sophisticated than what occurs sometimes on TV, and aggregating everything and relying on you all to say what you see so we can all have the conversation together and hopefully keeping the temperature low no matter what happens. Have a great night, a great weekend. Dodgers in 7. I'll keep saying it till it's not true. Good night.